Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel, Russia in Context. We are now a week into 2023, and the winter holidays in Russia are finally coming to an end, thankfully. After overindulging in all the delightful New Year's food that I talked about in the last video, I think I easily gained a kilo. Yes, indeed. Yesterday was finally Christmas in Russia, which somewhat officially marks a return to regular life. And yeah, you did hear that correctly. Yesterday, January 7th, was Christmas here in Russia, and here today, we're going to get into why that's the case and how exactly the holiday is celebrated here. That said, we're not going to get bogged down in religious statistics. That's something I'm sure we'll get into in this channel in due time. But first, a quick aside here before we get into everything. I want to first address the fact as to why it looks like I'm being interviewed by Jiminy Cricket. But with this tiny microphone and all. Well, if you maybe noticed in the last video, the acoustics in this room of mine are not the greatest. Kind of hard walls, cement actually on the other side, not a lot of soft padding, really just this couch right here. Things to absorb sound, stuff like that. So if I hold the microphone close to my face as such, I can avoid a lot of that echoey sound effect. It's not a sound effect, but you get what I'm saying. Also, I'm not super used to having this thing attached to my collar, you can imagine. So for now, I'm holding on to it. However, that said, I didn't get the microphone solely for this reason. Thing is, this channel is called Russia in Context, and the videos have largely been me sitting in a nondescript room. Super exciting, I know. Partially, I'll blame the winter holidays, right? It has been the holiday season, Also, partially going to blame the fact that for the last 2 or 3 days now, the temperature has been about negative 22 degrees Celsius. That's negative 8 degrees Fahrenheit for all you out there in the States. And that's before we factor in the wind chill. So, yeah, I stayed inside a little bit. Now, excuses aside, I am going to be putting this microphone to better use in the near future, out on the streets, letting y'all get better acquainted with Moscow, and getting to actually see a little bit of, well, not the inside of this room. But okay, the aside, we're finished with that. Let's get back to some historical and cultural context about Russia. So as I was saying, Russia celebrates Christmas on the 7th of January. Well, that's not exactly correct, as it's typically observed on the evening of the 6th of January into the 7th. In fact, it's a relatively common misconception here amongst Russians that in Europe and in North America, and well, basically the rest of the world, people there celebrate on the evening of the 24th into the 25th, because that sort of evening time celebration is how it is done here. And while I do remember midnight mass from my childhood, such timing of events is really only connected to the church, which makes sense as to why Russians observe Christmas on that evening. See, Christmas in Russia is totally a religious holiday. All secular aspects of the holiday, such as decorations and gift giving, copious amounts of food, campy pop songs, films people only think about for 1 month out of the year, that's all connected to New Year's here in Russia. And the answer as to why that is, as with most things in this country, is connected to the emergence of the Soviet Union. Two of the Soviets' earliest enemies were organized religion, and if that doesn't make sense to you, go read Marx, Opiate of the Masses, yada, yada, yada. So organized religion, and the bourgeois. So, yeah, the winter holidays came under attack by the Bolsheviks very quickly, right? Both Christmas and New Year's. In fact, both of them were outlawed in the beginning. However, New Year's was eventually returned to the fold in the mid to late 1930s. And most of the attributes that we associate with Christmas, such as a tree, gift giving, a very old fat guy with a beard who gives gifts to children, that all got just dumped on to New Year's. But Christmas itself was a religious holiday, so for the Soviets, that was still a no-go. No. Obviously, religious people did exist during the Soviet Union, in the Soviet Union, but if they celebrated the holidays, they would have done so kind of quietly, at home, to not draw attention to themselves. Now, with the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 90s, people began to quickly identify as Christian, Eastern Orthodox almost exclusively, but most people don't go to church here in Russia or even really read the Bible, things that you would typically associate with like a religious person in the States or in Europe, perhaps. So for most people, Christmas just sort of passes on by. People largely use it as an excuse to not work, to rest. But if you ask them what they're doing to sort of to celebrate Christmas, they likely wouldn't have an answer for you. That said, there are some very devout Eastern Orthodox Christians, and one of the things that they do in the lead up to Christmas is they refrain from consuming meat, eggs, dairy, alcohol, sort of a Lenten, sort of, not Lent, but that type of thing, a fasting style period starting from the 28th of November, and that continues all the way up until the evening of January 6th. In fact, on January 6th, they're not supposed to eat anything. That is until they see the first star in the night sky. Now, the first star in the night sky is supposed to represent the star over Bethlehem, right? Kind of pretty easy there. And then when the first star is observed, the family can sit down to the table. There's supposed to be 12 dishes, each to represent one of the apostles. Very symbolic. However, I do have to say that of all this information that you can find regarding how the faithful are supposed to celebrate Christmas, I've never actually once heard of a single person celebrating Christmas like this, or doing anything even remotely close to it. Now, this might be due to the fact that, again, not many people are actually like practicing Christians here. But even people who do go to church somewhat regularly or read the Bible, they still might not observe this serious fasting period because it does kind of run into the problem of New Year's Eve, where obviously if you are fasting, all of the dining, salads, alcohol, whatever it happens to be on December 31st, you cannot partake in. So yeah, I can see why that might be a bit of a turnoff, I suppose, for some people. So all of that aside, why do they celebrate almost 2 weeks after the majority of the world? Well, for that, we can thank Julius Caesar and, to a lesser degree, Vladimir Lenin. Now, Caesar is the main culprit here, and it has to do with the fact that he invented a calendar, aptly referred to as the Julian calendar. And it's basically the calendar that we use nowadays, except for one important difference, is that it was 12 minutes too long. 12 minutes. I know. Calendars count days, weeks, months, not minutes. So it'd be more appropriate to say that it didn't account for the year being slightly longer than we now recognize it to be. However, 12 minutes doesn't add up very quickly, especially when people on average back then had shorter lifespans. This problem didn't become evident until hundreds of years later, half a millennia later, in fact, when Christmas Day started inching closer and closer to Easter. In fact, because Easter is connected to the moon and all that fun stuff, Easter started moving closer and closer to the summer solstice. Problems. So in Europe, Pope George the 13th, well, he understood something needed to change. And so in 1582, he devised the Gregorian calendar. That's the one that we use to this day, right? Hey, good job, Pope George the 13th. So after some recalculations, they got the new calendar to almost nearly line up with the Julian one. Only a difference of 10 days. So, to just simplify the problem, on the night of October 4th, 1582, everyone went to bed and then woke up the next morning and it was already October 15th. Magic. Calendar magic. Problem solved, right? Well, not exactly. The Eastern Orthodox Church and the Russian Empire continued to use the Julian calendar, largely because the new Gregorian calendar was invented by a Catholic, and people outside of the Catholic Church just really historically do not seem to like the Catholic Church. So, hey, it is what it is. So anyway, the Russian Empire, Eastern Orthodox Church continued using the Julian calendar up until both of those things were ended by the Bolsheviks, at which point in time Lenin introduced the Gregorian calendar to Russia, and he also did a little magic with the numbers. I think at that point in time, it was a 14-day jump for them to catch up. However, the Russian Orthodox Church kind of continued to exist in some form, and they continued to follow the Julian calendar simply because they didn't want to fall in line with, well, the communists for probably obvious reasons. Now, that all said, the Russian Orthodox Church is not the only one to celebrate Christmas on the 7th of January, as 12% of all Christians in the world belong to a church that follows the Julian calendar. There are churches in Greece, in Egypt, and other African and Arab countries that are Orthodox in nature. However, the vast majority of the people that do celebrate on the 7th are in Russia and Ukraine. So, regardless of how you celebrated the winter holidays or when exactly, I hope they were wonderful. I'll see you soon back here on Russia in Context.